In a previous training video, we described the process of creating a custom Lightning component to insert metrics on your account page that displays values from custom fields on the account. And one of the ways that this is a very powerful tool is to display summarized, auto-calculated values that you don't have to type in the numbers in the record view. So maybe we want to summarize the number of employees or the number of contacts that are within this account. So let's just start with that example, because that's a good example for us to take this number right now, which is just a static number, and replace it with a dynamically calculated number. In Salesforce, they give you the ability to create automatic summary values. If we go into one of our custom objects here, we can go into our fields and we can do a new field, and we have this really cool option here called Rollup Summary. And so, but here's the problem. You can notice that this is grayed out. Why is it grayed out? It says you cannot create this type of field on this object because it is not the master in a master detail relationship. And this is not a master in a master detail relationship. And so we can only create those summary values within a master detail relationship. Again, a master detail relationship is a type of relationship in Salesforce. There's really three types of relationships. We normally work with two. It's either a lookup relationship or a master detail relationship. And the master detail is the one that gives us this really cool functionality for automatically calculating rollup summaries. However, we don't always want a master detail relationship. And here's some criteria of when you choose a master detail relationship. First of all, the relationship field is required. So if we use an example like an invoice and an invoice item, that would be a good example of a master detail relationship. The invoice item cannot be created without the ID of the parent or the master invoice. So it's always required. The second thing is that the invoice detail would inherit all the sharing and ownership rules of the master. So there's not any way to set different permissions basically on the detail record different from the master record. The third case here is that when a user deletes the master record, then all the detail records are deleted. So if we delete the invoice, Salesforce also deletes the invoice line items. And then once those three are true and we create the master detail, then we can create these nice roll-up summary fields. So this all sounds great, and why don't we always create master detail relationships? Well, the problem is the sharing rules. We've come into multiple times requirements where we need to specify, even on something like an invoice or an invoice item, that even that specific example, which is a great use case for master detail relationships, there are times when you want to have different permissions for the invoice versus the detail versus the master. So we have to really think that through, and many times, not always, but many times we end up choosing a lookup relationship because we might need to have different permissions. So if you create a lookup relationship, then you lose the rollup summary. Well, if you don't have the rollup summary functionality, how do you create these automatic summarized fields? Well, one option would be to have a programmer write a trigger and summarize the value and save it to a field. Well, that's great, but that takes a bit of time and also developer resources. And so is there a way that we can do this, solve this problem with clicks, not code? One of the ways that we've done this in the past is using what's called the Lookup Rollup Summaries package. And if you just Google Lookup Rollup Summary, you'll come to this Andrew Fawcett package on GitHub. Andrew Fawcett is the, I think, CTO of Financial Force, and he's got just tons of really cool stuff for Salesforce. And so in this page here, he's got a bunch of really great information on how to use it, but there's a bunch of releases, and you can see it's actively updated. And we can just click on one of these links here. We can click to install it on our sandbox, or if we're in production, we can click and install it in our production. Once we do that, then it'll ask us to log in to our instance if we're not. And once we do, then we can decide who to install it for. We'll choose admin, and then we'll hit install. Since I've already installed it, then I don't need to do that again. And so here now, once we have that installed, we can click on you'll get this app called Declarative Lookup Rollup Summaries. When you get this app, you need to go to the welcome page. And the welcome page has a prompt on here that says, allow the remote site. You need to click on that, which I already did, so you can't see it. But that allows the package to run. And so you need to make sure you click that. And once you do that, then we can create a new rollup summary. So we're going to click on Manage Lookup Rollup Summaries, and it defaults to create new. If you have more that you've created, you can select those. And so we're going to create a name here. We'll call it number of contacts. And then one thing I've forgotten this many times, and it's a really weird error message, you need to make sure that you type in a unique name. So similar in Salesforce to how they require a lookup or a API name, it's kind of like that. And so we need to make sure we have that value. The parent object is going to be, well, in this case, let's use the example of accounts and contacts. So we want to count the number of contacts and display that count on the account. So the parent object is going to be account. The child object is going to be contact. Now, how do you know the names here? These are the API names. And so when you go to the details of any of your objects, you'll see the API name, and you can just double click on that and copy that. In this case, it's a standard object, so standard objects don't have the _ C, so you can just see its account. So I always just copy paste that, make sure that I have that value correct, and I'll just paste that in here, and then grab the account and paste that in there as well. The relationship field, so this is the relationship between contact and account. And so the contact has an account ID, and that's how we know the relationship between the two objects. Again, that's the API name, so it might be a good idea if you're doing this on custom objects and custom fields to just go right into your object and look at the lookup value. In this case, it's account. And again, just double click that field name, that API name, so you make sure you get it right. And then we can add some more relationship criteria here to filter the records. I'll leave that blank for now, but you can add some statements in there to filter the records. The field to aggregate, this is where we're counting. In this case, we're counting the contacts. So we can just use ID because it's just going to be a count. But maybe that was sales data, and so you want to choose your sales custom field. Whatever field that you're wanting to aggregate or summarize is what you'll put here. Again, this is the API name, so make sure you get that right. We don't need to order it in this case. The count, in this case, we're going to use count because we're counting all the contacts. And the place that we want to put the result of this aggregate field is going to be number of contacts. So this is a new field that we set up on the account just for this lesson. And so if you see this here, number of contacts, so let's just double click that guy and make sure that we have that right. Okay, and so that's all we really need at this point. Now, you'll notice, the calculation mode, we can just leave these default. We want to run real time and use the sharing mode of the current user. That's fine. We cannot activate this yet. What happens is we have to save it first. And this package then allows us to manage the trigger. So this is kind of like auto-creating the code that, well, sort of a developer would create. And so what it's doing is kind of doing that automatically. And so we're just going to go in here and say deploy that, okay? And so right now it is actually deploying this custom code into our live instance of Salesforce, which is a bit magic. I think that's why we need to allow the remote site ID. I'm actually not sure under the hood what is going on with the Andrew Fawcett's package here, but he's doing some magic to allow us to do this in a live scenario. So it just takes a second to deploy this, and then once the deployment is done into our production instance, in this case of Salesforce, then we can go back and activate our rollup summary because we have the underlying trigger code all set up. So you can see here that the package has installed our trigger code, and so now we can just go back, hit cancel there, which is a little weird to hit cancel to go back. Don't worry, you're not canceling out anything. So we are now back to our rollup summary, and now we can activate it. So if I hit save here, so now what happens is that anytime we save our contact or save the account, then it's going to recalculate this. So if I go into my account and we look at this field here, number of contacts, if I just refresh, I didn't hit save yet, so it's not going to have a value there. So if we just edit any value and hit save here, so now if we hit save, it's going to summarize all of our contacts now. So the question remains, do we have any contacts? Okay, so let's save that. Yeah, I did set that up. Oh yeah, it does do, because it's a trigger and the trigger has to run after the record's been updated. It does take sometimes just a second for that trigger to run. I think it does run it in a batch mode, so it just takes a second sometimes to update that. But you'll notice then in a second it's going to update that to 2 because we added another contact. So now we have this really rich summary data that we can utilize, and then the last step would be maybe to just grab that custom field value and stick it in here in our custom component, which let's just do that real quick. We'll go into the developer console and we'll go into our Lightning component that we worked on in the previous lesson. And let's just call this employees. Maybe we'll call it contacts now. And then let's grab that number of contacts field that we just set up. And now if I save this and I come back here to refresh, then we'll see the refreshed value there in a second. There we go, contacts, and oh, that's funny. Because we're using the force record data Lightning functionality here from the Lightning data service, we need to just make sure that we add that new field right there. So I'm going to save that, and now if I refresh this, it's going to give us the value here at some point. Yeah, there it is. Great. Now, I'm just wondering here why it's not refreshing the count, because we do have 2 contacts now. So I might just think about that for a second in my query. There's something that's not updating that. Because it's not something that we need to just always save the account. So I will think about that and I will come back in this video in just a second. Hey, I'm back. And it just took me a minute there to figure out what was going on. I think it's always good to see people fight through figuring out problems in Salesforce, because that's what always happens. You have to figure figure out the problem. What happened here is this is just a real plain vanilla install of the nonprofit success pack. And within the nonprofit success pack, they have it set up for kind of this affiliated contacts. And what it is it's actually an object in that they install called affiliated contacts and affiliation. And what it is that's kind of like a joined table between accounts and the contact. So here's the contact, and then it's a lookup to the contact, and then there's also the lookup to the organization. And so what happens, in fact, this is actually a master detail, which is kind of cool because we could use that in some ways for our lookups that we wanted to do. But in this case, since we are just going straight to the contact, the problem is that this first kind of default sample contact in the nonprofit starter pack was actually not an employee. It wasn't they didn't have an account set to this test account. So that's why we only show one contact here, which is actually true, even though there's other affiliations. So let's just to test this, make sure I'm right. Let's just go in here and let's create a new contact. And in fact, let's just do it this way. Create a new contact. This is going to be a road runner. And so that's it. We're just going to set up a simple contact and then hit save. So since we're creating this contact within the account, this particular affiliation is actually going to be have the account of Advantis. So you can see here, if I click on it, it has the account there. So now if I go back into Advantis, you'll now notice we have two contacts. So the functionality is working correct. I was just unclear about this affiliation here, if it was truly an employee or not. So hopefully you enjoyed this and it wasn't too confusing, and you get a feel for how to really use this powerful functionality that in this package called Lookup Rollup Summaries.